The silver mating cord around Seraphina Darkhollow's wrist had turned to ash 3 hours ago, crumbling away in front of 200 witnesses as Marcus spoke the words that shattered her world. She still felt the phantom weight of it, still caught herself reaching to touch the braided silk that had bound them for 6 years, since the day they'd turned 18 and felt the mate bond snap into place. Since the day her father had smiled for the first time in months and declared the union a blessing from the moon goddess herself. Now Marcus stood 5 feet away, his handsome face twisted with such revulsion that Seraphina's wolf whimpered and retreated deep into the shadows of her consciousness. The pack healer, old Meredith with her clouded eye and gnarled hands, had just finished her examination, and the silence in the ceremonial hall pressed against Seraphina's skin like a physical weight. "A daughter," Meredith said, her voice carrying through the space. "The child is female, I am certain." Marcus's lip curled. "You're absolutely certain? There's no chance." "None, Alpha. The child's energy is distinctly feminine, a she-wolf, strong and healthy at 8 months gestation." Seraphina's hand moved instinctively to her rounded belly, where her daughter had been kicking all morning as if sensing her mother's anxiety. The wedding dress, white silk embroidered with silver thread, a gown that had taken 12 seamstresses 3 months to complete, suddenly felt like a burial shroud. Her breath came shallow and quick, her corset stays digging into ribs that seemed to constrict with each passing second. "Marcus," she whispered, reaching for him even as her wolf howled warnings in her mind. "Please, we can— Don't touch me." He stepped back so quickly he nearly stumbled, his eyes flashing amber with his wolf's disgust. "A she-wolf. You dare stand here, in front of my pack, in front of the Alliance representatives, and present me with a useless girl child as my heir?" Heat flooded Seraphina's cheeks. Around them, pack members shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke. No one defended her. She searched the crowd desperately for her brother Lucian, finding him near the dais where their father sat rigid and stone-faced. Father, who'd arranged this marriage believing it would secure their family's position in the Thornwood pack hierarchy, who wouldn't even meet her eyes now. Lucian's ice-blue eyes met hers, and her stomach dropped. His arms were crossed over his chest, his expression carefully neutral, but she saw the calculation there. The satisfaction. "You promised me a son," Marcus continued, his voice rising. The alpha power in his words made several wolves in the audience lower their heads in submission. "Your father promised me a male heir to unite our bloodlines, to strengthen the pack's warrior lines. Instead, you bring me this burden." "She's your daughter," Seraphina said, fighting to keep her voice steady even as tears burned behind her eyes. She would not cry. She would not give them that. "Our daughter, Marcus. How can you call her a burden before she's even born?" "Because she's worthless to me." Each word landed like a physical blow. "What use is a she-wolf? She can't lead warriors. She can't defend territory. She'll just be another mouth to feed until some other alpha claims her. And then what? I get nothing. No heir. No legacy. Nothing." Meredith gathered her herbs and potions, her movements quick and nervous as she backed away from the center of the hall. The old healer wouldn't meet Seraphina's eyes. No one would. "Marcus, please." Seraphina hated the desperate note in her voice, hated that she was begging, but terror clawed at her throat. "We can try again. After she's born, we can—" "There will be no after." Marcus turned to face the assembled pack, his alpha voice ringing through the hall. "I, Marcus Thornwood, reject Seraphina Darkhollow as my mate, and Luna. I reject the bond between us. I reject the child she carries. By the laws of our ancestors and the blessing of the moon goddess, I sever all ties between us." The pain hit like lightning through her chest. Seraphina gasped, her knees buckling as the mate bond, already weakened by Marcus's disgust over the past months, began to tear. It felt like her ribcage was splitting open, like something vital was being ripped from her very soul. Her wolf howled in agony, thrashing against the breaking connection, trying desperately to hold on to what they'd believed was there forever. The silver cord around her wrist blazed hot, burning her skin, and then disintegrated into fine ash that drifted to the polished wood floor. Serafina barely caught herself on the edge of a bench, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Through the haze of pain, she watched Marcus stride toward Lucian, watched her brother clasp the Alpha's shoulder in solidarity. "I propose a new alliance," Marcus announced, his voice strong and clear while Serafina struggled to remain standing. "Lucian Darkhollow has proven his worth to this pack time and again. His warrior skills are unmatched. His strategic mind is sharp, and he carries the true Darkhollow bloodline without the taint of weakness. No, no, this couldn't be happening. I name Lucian Darkhollow as my heir and beta," Marcus continued. "When he proves himself fully, he will take a position of honor in this pack, one his sister clearly cannot fill." Lucian's face remained impassive, but Serafina saw the triumph glittering in his eyes as he bowed his head in acceptance. Her brother, her own blood. He'd known this was coming. He'd planned for this. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Lucian had been the one to suggest Meredith examine her today, in front of everyone, instead of waiting until after the ceremony as tradition dictated. Lucian had been the one whispering to Marcus these past weeks, ever since the healer had confirmed Serafina's pregnancy. Lucian, who'd always resented that Father had favored her, that Father had arranged her marriage to the Alpha while Lucian received no such honor. "Strip her of pack belongings," Marcus ordered, waving a dismissive hand. "She has 1 hour to gather personal effects only. No jewelry, no weapons, no gold. Then she is to be escorted beyond pack territory and left there." "Marcus, you can't—" Serafina took a stumbling step forward, her hand still pressed to her chest where the bond's absence throbbed like an open wound. "I'm pregnant. Where am I supposed to go?" "That," he said coldly, finally meeting her eyes, "is no longer my concern. You should have given me a son." 2 warriors approached, their faces apologetic but their grips firm as they took her arms. Serafina recognized them: Thomas, who'd taught her to track prey when she was 12, and David, who'd danced with her at the last harvest festival. Now they led her away like a criminal, their fingers tight enough to bruise. The hour passed in a blur of humiliation. Pack members invaded her chambers, stripping away everything Marcus had given her during their courtship and mating. The ruby necklace he'd presented at their engagement. Gone. The silver daggers she'd trained with since adolescence. Confiscated. Even her mother's wooden jewelry box, a treasure from before Mother's death 10 years ago, was deemed pack property because it contained a single gold coin. They left her with the clothes on her back, though someone had the cruelty to force her to change from the wedding gown into a simple traveling dress, a small pack containing 2 additional outfits, a water skin, and a pouch with 5 silver coins. Not enough to secure lodging for more than a few nights. Not enough to survive. Serafina stood in the center of her stripped room, taking in the bare walls where tapestries had hung, the empty wardrobe, the naked bed frame. This chamber had been hers since childhood, filled with memories of her mother's gentle voice, her father's rare laughter, years of dreams about the future she'd build with her mate. All of it gone. Her daughter kicked, a firm pressure against her ribs, and Serafina pressed her palm to the spot. "I know," she whispered. "I know you're scared. I'm scared too." At least they'd left her the traveling dress's hidden pocket, where she'd sewn the only things that truly mattered: a miniature portrait of her parents, barely larger than her thumb, and the moonstone pendant her mother had given her on her 16th birthday. The pendant had been tucked beneath her wedding dress, hidden against her skin, and she'd managed to transfer it to the hidden pocket while changing. She touched both through the fabric, drawing what little comfort she could from their presence. The escort to the border was silent and swift. 20 warriors surrounded her as they marched through the forest, past the training grounds where she'd spent countless hours, past the market where vendors she'd known her entire life turned their backs. Children pointed and whispered. Women she'd called friends pulled their young ones close, as if Seraphina's failure might be contagious. Lucian waited at the boundary marker, a natural stone arch that marked where Thornwood territory ended and the unclaimed wilderness began. The setting sun cast long shadows across his sharp features, making him look like a stranger. Perhaps he always had been. Sister. His voice held false warmth, the kind he used when he wanted something. I want you to know this isn't personal. Seraphina stared at him, at this man who'd shared her childhood, who'd trained beside her, who'd sworn at their father's deathbed that he'd always protect her. Her voice came out steady, colder than she'd known she could sound. You orchestrated this. You convinced Marcus to reject me. I simply helped him see reason. Lucian stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. Father always favored you. Always. Even though I'm older, even though I'm stronger, he arranged for you to mate the alpha. Do you have any idea how that felt? Watching you receive everything while I got nothing? So you took it. Her hand moved to her belly, protective. You took my mate, my home, my place in the pack. And now you'll take Father's legacy. Father's legacy should have been mine from the start. Lucian's mask slipped, revealing the bitterness beneath. But don't worry, sister. I'm not completely heartless. I'll make sure your name is remembered, as a cautionary tale about weak bloodlines. He gestured to the warriors, who pushed her forward through the arch. Seraphina stumbled, her body awkward with pregnancy weight, and caught herself against a tree trunk. Oh, and Seraphina? Lucian called out as she regained her footing. That child you're carrying? If it really is a she-wolf, you'd best pray she dies quietly. Marcus has already declared any female offspring of his bloodline to be forsaken by the moon goddess. If she survives, she'll be hunted. The words hit like a dagger to the gut. Seraphina turned to see her brother smiling, actually smiling, before he pivoted and walked back toward Packlands. The warriors followed, leaving her alone in the gathering darkness. She stood there for long minutes, hand pressed to her belly where her daughter continued her restless movement, and felt the last threads of her old life snap away. The pack bond, which had thrummed in the back of her mind since birth, went silent. She was packless, mateless, homeless. And yet, her daughter lived, moved, fought. We're going to survive this, Seraphina whispered to the life growing inside her, even as tears finally spilled down her cheeks. I don't know how, but we will. I promise you, little one. I promise. She turned away from the stone arch, from everything she'd ever known, and walked into the wilderness. Behind her, the last traces of sunset faded from the sky. Ahead, only darkness waited. But she walked anyway, one hand on her belly, feeling her daughter's kicks like tiny promises against her palm. They would survive. They had to. The alternative was unthinkable. 3 days later, the forest at night was a living thing, full of sounds that made Seraphina's exhausted mind conjure threats in every shadow. Her feet had long since gone numb, her slippers, never meant for wilderness travel, torn to shreds. She felt each stone and root through the thin soles, but the physical pain was almost welcome. It gave her something to focus on besides the hollow ache in her chest where the mate bond had been. 3 days. She'd been walking for 3 days, stopping only when her body absolutely refused to continue, drinking from streams when she found them, eating the dried berries she'd managed to identify as safe. The 5 silver coins remained untouched in her pouch because she'd seen no villages, No settlements, no sign of civilization at all. Just endless trees and the constant gnawing awareness that she was utterly, completely alone. Her daughter had grown quieter over the past day, her movements less frequent, and that terrified Serafina more than anything else. Though sometimes, in moments between waking and sleep, she could have sworn she felt something strange from her child, a warmth that seemed to pulse with its own light, a presence that felt far more powerful than any unborn pup should. She pressed her hand to her belly as she stumbled over another root, whispering reassurances she didn't believe herself. Just a little farther, little one. We'll find water soon. We'll rest. You're strong. I know you are. The sound of running water reached her ears like a prayer answered. Serafina pushed through a dense thicket, ignoring the branches that caught at her dress and hair, and emerged onto the bank of a river. The moon was nearly full, its light turning the water's surface to liquid silver. She'd never seen anything so beautiful. She dropped to her knees at the water's edge, cupping her hands to drink. The cold shocked her system, but she drank deeply, then splashed water on her face and neck. For a moment, she simply knelt there, listening to the river's song, letting herself believe that perhaps they would survive after all. Then she saw the campfire. It was perhaps a quarter-mile downstream, the orange glow visible through the trees. Serafina's first instinct was to run, to hide, but her body refused to obey. She was so tired, so desperately tired, and the thought of warmth, of possible food, was almost overwhelming. She stood on shaking legs and made her way along the riverbank, moving quietly despite her exhaustion. As she drew closer, she could make out tents, 4 of them, arranged in a military formation around the central fire. Soldiers, then? But whose? She'd crossed beyond Thornwood territory, but she had no idea what lands bordered her former pack's holdings. For all she knew, she'd wandered into enemy territory. A man sat nearest the fire, his back to her, and even from this distance she could see the breadth of his shoulders, the way the firelight caught on silver threading through black hair. Something about his posture spoke of authority, of power held in careful check. An alpha, perhaps, or at least someone high-ranking. Serafina took another step forward, and her vision swam. The world tilted sideways, and she realized with distant alarm that she was falling. Her knees hit the ground first, then her hands, and she heard a sharp curse from the direction of the camp. Footsteps approached, quick and purposeful. She tried to rise, to flee or fight or do something, but her body had finally reached its limit. Strong hands caught her shoulders as she swayed, lowering her carefully to the ground instead of letting her collapse. "Easy," a rough voice said, surprisingly gentle. "I've got you." Serafina forced her eyes to focus on the man kneeling beside her. The scarred soldier from the fire, she realized. Up close, she could see a jagged scar running from his left temple down to his jaw, pale against tanned skin. His eyes were dark, almost black in the firelight, framed by laugh lines that suggested he smiled often despite the hardness in his face. Silver streaked through hair that might have been pure black in his youth. He reached for a water skin at his belt, uncorking it with one hand, while the other remained steady on her shoulder. "Here, small sips." She should refuse, should pull away from this stranger's touch and run, protect herself and her daughter from whatever danger he might represent. But when he brought the water skin to her lips, she drank. The water was cool and clean, and she heard herself make a small sound of relief. The man's hand on her shoulder tightened fractionally, and she felt him go very, very still. "How long since you've had water?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. I found a stream yesterday, I think, or the day before." Time had become meaningless during her flight. "I've been traveling for—" Her words cut off as their eyes met properly for the first time. His hand was still on her shoulder, steadying her, and the moment their gazes locked, something slammed into her chest with physical force. Heat. White gold heat that started at the point of contact and exploded through her entire body, racing along nerve endings she didn't know existed. Serafina gasped, her free hand flying to her chest as the warmth concentrated there, right where the mate bond with Marcus had torn away. But this was different. Stronger. It felt like coming home and being set on fire at the same time, like every cell in her body suddenly recognized this stranger and was screaming mine. No. No. This couldn't be happening. The man's eyes flashed brilliant gold, his pupils elongating for a heartbeat before returning to normal. She heard the sharp intake of his breath, saw his hand tremble against her shoulder before his grip tightened almost painfully. A low growl rumbled from deep in his chest, so quiet she might have imagined it if she couldn't feel the vibration where he touched her. Deep in Serafina's mind, in that place where her wolf had retreated after Marcus's rejection, something stirred. Her wolf, silent and broken for days, suddenly surged forward with strength that staggered her. And beneath that, she felt her daughter's presence flare, that strange warmth she'd sensed during her journey now blazing bright. Mate, her wolf whimpered, the word echoing through Serafina's consciousness with desperate certainty. Mate, mate, mate. No, Serafina whispered, the word torn from her throat. She tried to pull back, but her body refused to obey, drawn toward this man as if gravity itself had shifted. Please, no, not again. The soldier's eyes searched her face, and she saw the moment he took in her condition, the torn dress, the exhaustion written in every line of her body, the way her hand pressed protectively to her swollen belly. Understanding flashed across his features, followed by something that looked almost like pain. You're pregnant, he said, his voice rough. It doesn't matter. Serafina found the strength to push away from him, scrambling backward even as her wolf howled in protest. The white gold warmth where he'd touched her began to fade, leaving cold in its wake. Whatever you think you felt, it doesn't matter. I can't. I won't. Hey, Commander, everything all right? Another voice called from the direction of the camp, followed by approaching footsteps. The scarred soldier's gaze never left Serafina's face. Stay back, he ordered, the alpha power in those two words making her wolf instinctively want to submit. Give us a moment. But sir, I said stay back. The command was absolute, and Serafina heard the footsteps retreat. He turned back to her, and this time his movements were slow, deliberate, as if approaching a frightened animal. I'm not going to hurt you, he said quietly. Whatever happened to you, whoever hurt you, I'm not them. Do you understand? Serafina shook her head, tears threatening to spill. You don't understand. I was rejected. 3 days ago, my mate rejected me in front of the entire pack because I'm carrying a daughter. They threw me out with nothing. And now you. We can't. Her daughter kicked hard, as if protesting her mother's words, and Serafina's breath hitched. The soldier's eyes dropped to her belly, watching the movement visible even through her dress, and something shifted in his expression. A daughter, he repeated softly. You were rejected for carrying a daughter. She's worthless, according to my former mate. A burden, not worth keeping. The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. So whatever the moon goddess thinks she's doing, binding me to another mate, it's cruel. I have nothing to offer you. Nothing. Just a rejected bond and a child that no one wants. The soldier was quiet for a long moment, and Serafina watched emotions flicker across his face too quickly to identify. When he finally spoke, his voice was gentle but firm. First, you need food and rest. Then we'll talk. Can you stand? I don't need your help, she said, even as her body swayed with exhaustion. I don't need anyone's help. That may be true, he agreed, but you're going to accept it anyway, because whatever pride you're holding on to isn't worth risking your child's health. He stood, offering his hand. My name is Corvus, and I swear by the moon goddess that neither you nor your daughter will come to harm in my camp." Seraphina stared at his extended hand, at the scarred knuckles and calloused palm that spoke of a warrior's life. The mate bond. She could feel it now, a golden thread trying to establish itself between them, hummed with warmth and promise. Her wolf paced eagerly, desperate to close the distance to touch their mate again. But the memory of Marcus's rejection was too fresh. The way he'd looked at her with disgust, the phantom pain of the bond tearing away, the humiliation of being cast out like garbage. She couldn't survive that again. Wouldn't survive it. "I'll accept food and shelter for the night," she said, ignoring his hand and struggling to her feet on her own. The world tilted dangerously, and she would have fallen if Corvus hadn't caught her elbow. His touch sent another spark of golden warmth through her arm, and she jerked away as soon as she had her balance. "But that's all. In the morning, I'm leaving." Something that might have been disappointment crossed Corvus's face, but he nodded. "In the morning, then. But tonight, let me help you, please." The please broke something in her. Alpha males didn't say please in her experience. They commanded, they took, they demanded. But this scarred stranger with his gentle voice and careful movements was asking permission. "Just for tonight," she whispered. "Just for tonight," he agreed, though the look in his eyes suggested he was already planning for much longer than that. He led her into the camp, and Seraphina felt the weight of multiple gazes assessing her. 4 other men sat around the fire, all warriors by the look of them, all wearing expressions of carefully controlled surprise as they took in their commander's unexpected guest. "This is—" Corvus paused, and Seraphina realized she hadn't told him her name. He looked at her questioningly. "Seraphina," she supplied reluctantly. "Seraphina Darkhollow." She saw recognition flicker across 2 of the men's faces at the name, followed by pity. Word of her rejection must have already spread beyond Thornwood territory. Shame burned hot in her cheeks. "Seraphina needs food and a place to rest," Corvus continued, his voice carrying an unmistakable warning. "I trust that won't be a problem?" "Of course not, sir," the nearest soldier said quickly, standing to offer his seat near the fire. He was young, perhaps 20, with kind eyes and a ready smile. "We've got stew that's still warm, and my tent is the driest if the lady needs—" "She'll take mine," Corvus interrupted. "I'll bunk with the rest of you." The young soldier's eyebrows rose fractionally, but he nodded. "Yes, sir." Corvus guided Seraphina to the vacated seat, his hand barely touching the small of her back, but burning through the fabric of her dress nonetheless. She sank onto the fallen log gratefully, her legs trembling with relief at not having to support her weight anymore. A bowl of stew appeared in her hands, thick with meat and vegetables, steam rising in fragrant curls. Her stomach cramped with hunger, and she had to force herself to eat slowly, to not gulp it down like an animal. The men around the fire pretended not to watch, but she felt their attention like a physical weight. "How far have you traveled?" Corvus asked, settling onto the ground near her feet. "Not too close," she noticed, giving her space despite the mate bond thrumming between them. 3 days, maybe 4. She took another spoonful of stew, closing her eyes at the burst of flavor. "I lost count." "From Thornwood territory?" Her eyes snapped open. "How did you—" "Your name," he said gently. "And the timing. Word reached us 2 days ago about an alpha rejecting his mate for carrying a female child. I'm sorry." Seraphina looked down at her bowl, unable to meet his gaze. "It doesn't matter now." "It matters." His voice was low, intense. What he did was unconscionable. What they all did. Allowing it, supporting it, casting you out. It goes against every law of pack honor. And yet it happened. The bitterness crept back into her voice. Because a she-wolf has no value, apparently. Even one not yet born. Corvus was quiet for a moment, And when she finally looked at him, she found him watching her with an expression she couldn't decipher. Some men, he said slowly, are fools who don't recognize treasure when the moon goddess places it directly in their hands. The word sent warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the stew or the fire. Serafina forced herself to look away, to focus on finishing her meal instead of analyzing what he might mean. Serafina finished her stew in silence, hyper-aware of Corvus sitting near her feet, of the way the firelight caught in his dark hair and made the silver streaks gleam like moonlight. The other soldiers had returned to their own conversations, their voices low and companionable, and she found herself relaxing incrementally into the warmth and safety of the camp. "You should rest," Corvus said eventually, rising to his feet with fluid grace. "My tent is the blue one there." He pointed to a canvas structure at the edge of the clearing, larger than the others. "There are blankets, a bedroll, everything you need." Serafina stood slowly, her muscles protesting. 3 days of walking had taken their toll, and the weight of her daughter pressed heavy against her spine. "Thank you," she said, and meant it more than he could possibly know. "I don't know how to repay you for this kindness." "There's no debt," he said quietly. His eyes met hers, holding her gaze with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Sleep, Serafina. Tomorrow we can talk about what comes next." She nodded and made her way to the tent, feeling his eyes on her until she slipped through the canvas flap. Inside, it smelled like pine and leather and something uniquely masculine that made her wolf stir restlessly. The bedroll was thick and soft, piled with furs that looked expensive. Military supplies, she thought. But there was a care to their arrangement that suggested Corvus valued his comfort when he could get it. Serafina lowered herself onto the bedroll with a sigh of relief, her body melting into the softness. For the first time in days, she felt warm, safe. Her hand curved over her belly, feeling her daughter shift and settle. "We found help," she whispered to the child inside her. "I don't know what it means, or what happens next, but for tonight, we're safe." Sleep claimed her almost instantly, dragging her down into darkness. The nightmares came as they always did. Marcus's face twisted with disgust, his hand raised to strike her. Her brother Lucian standing beside him, cold approval in his eyes, the pack surrounding them, watching her humiliation with satisfaction, hands tearing at her clothes, her belongings, shoving her toward the border while she begged, while she pleaded for mercy that would never come. "Please," she heard herself crying. "Please, I'll do anything, just let me stay, let me—" "Serafina." The voice cut through the nightmare, low and rough, but infinitely gentle. She jerked awake, gasping, her face wet with tears. The tent was dark except for the faint glow of moonlight filtering through the canvas, and for a disorienting moment she couldn't remember where she was. "Serafina, you're safe." Corvus's voice again, but outside the tent. Not intruding. "You're safe, I promise. No one will hurt you here." She pressed her hand to her mouth, trying to muffle the sobs that wanted to tear free. Her whole body shook with them, with the residual terror of the dream and the awful reality that it wasn't really a dream at all. It had happened. All of it. "I'm sorry," she managed. "I didn't mean to wake you." "Don't apologize." There was a rustling sound, and she realized he must be sitting just outside the tent flap. "I wasn't sleeping anyway." Serafina drew her knees up as much as her belly allowed, wrapping her arms around herself. The mate bond hummed between them, a golden thread of awareness that made her acutely conscious of how close he was, separated only by canvas. Her wolf wanted her to invite him in, wanted the comfort of his presence, his warmth. But the human part of her, the part that had been shattered and rejected, held back. "Tell me something," Corvus said after a moment. "Something that has nothing to do with pain or fear. Tell me about your daughter." The request caught her off guard. "What do you want to know?" Anything. Everything. When did you first feel her move? What do you imagine she'll be like? Serafina found herself smiling despite the tear tracks on her cheeks. I felt her move for the first time 2 months ago. Just a flutter. So light I thought I imagined it. But then it happened again. Stronger. Like butterfly wings against my insides. She stroked her belly absently. She's active at night. Sleeps during the day when I'm moving around, but once I lie down to rest, she starts kicking. As if she's dancing. She'll be a warrior, Corvus said, and there was warmth in his voice. Strong, spirited. Marcus said she'd be worthless. The words slipped out before Serafina could stop them. Bitter and raw. He said female wolves are only good for breeding and service. That they can't lead, can't fight, can't do anything important. That's why he rejected us. Because she wasn't the son he'd been promised. There was a long silence from outside the tent. When Corvus finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled, but she could hear the fury underneath. Marcus is a fool who wouldn't recognize strength if it bit him in the throat. Female wolves are some of our best warriors, some of our wisest leaders. The fact that he threw away his mate and child because of her gender tells me everything I need to know about his worth as an alpha. My father agreed with him, Serafina said quietly. He was the one who arranged the match, who promised Marcus a male heir. When the healer confirmed I carried a daughter, my father wouldn't even look at me, just nodded when Marcus demanded I be cast out. And your brother? There was something sharp in the question. Lucian stood beside Marcus through all of it. They're friends. Have been since childhood. I think... She paused, swallowing hard. I think Lucian was glad. He's always resented that I carried alpha blood too. That father trained me in pack politics and combat. With me gone, Lucian becomes father's only heir. He gets everything. Another silence, longer this time. Serafina wondered what Corvus was thinking, whether he regretted taking in such a complicated mess of a woman. But when he spoke again, his voice was gentle. My mother used to tell me stories about the moon goddess, he said, about how she chooses mates with perfect precision, pairing souls that complement each other. She told me that when I found my mate, I'd know instantly, because it would feel like coming home after a long journey. Serafina's breath caught. She knew what he was implying, what he was offering without directly saying it. The moment I touched your hand at the river, Corvus continued, everything in my world shifted into place. I've been searching for 20 years, Serafina. 20 years of watching other wolves find their mates while I remained alone. And then there you were, collapsed on the riverbank, carrying a child that another man was fool enough to reject. He paused. The moon goddess doesn't make mistakes. If she brought you to me, if she gave us this bond, then there's a reason. A purpose. I have nothing to offer you, Serafina whispered. No pack, no status, no wealth. Just a rejected mating bond and a daughter that no one wants. You have yourself, he said simply, and that's everything I've been waiting for. As for your daughter, if you'll allow it, I would be honored to raise her as my own, to give her a father who will cherish her exactly as she is. The tears came again, but different this time. Not bitter, but aching with a hope she was terrified to feel. I don't even know you. You're just a soldier who happened to find me. Then let me tell you. She heard him shift, settling more comfortably against the outside of the tent. My name is Corvus Shadowfang. I'm 36 years old. I got these scars fighting rogue wolves in the Northern Territories 5 years ago, 3 against 1, and I barely survived. My mother died when I was young, but she taught me to value honor above all else, to protect those weaker than myself, to never abuse power or authority. He paused, and when he continued, his voice was softer. I'm not perfect, Serafina. I have a temper that I have to keep in check. I've made decisions in battle that still haunt me. I'm not always good at expressing what I feel, My men say I'm too stoic, too controlled. But I swear to you, on my honor and my life, that I will never harm you or your child. I will never reject you. And if you give me a chance, I will spend every day proving that you made the right choice in trusting me." Serafina closed her eyes, feeling the sincerity in his words through the mate bond. Her wolf was practically howling at her to accept, to claim, to stop being so stubborn and let this male take care of them. But the wounded human part of her couldn't quite let go of the fear. "I need time," she said finally, "to think, to understand what's happening." "Take all the time you need," Corvus replied. "I'm not going anywhere." They sat in companionable silence after that, separated by canvas but connected by the bond neither of them could deny. Eventually, Serafina felt herself beginning to drift, lulled by the steady sound of Corvus's breathing and the knowledge that he was standing guard. "Corvus," she murmured, half asleep. "Yes? Thank you. For sitting with me. For talking." "Always," he said quietly. "Whenever you need me, I'm here." She fell asleep with that promise wrapped around her like a blanket, warmer than any fur. Morning came too quickly, pale light filtering through the tent and pulling Serafina from dreams that were, for once, not nightmares. She sat up slowly, wincing at the various aches and pains that had settled into her body overnight. Her daughter kicked, a firm press against her ribs that made Serafina smile despite everything. "Good morning to you too," she murmured, stroking the spot where her daughter's foot pushed out. When she emerged from the tent, she found the camp already stirring. The young soldier from the night before, she thought she'd heard Corvus call him Damien, was tending the fire, while two others were breaking down their own tents with efficient movements. Corvus stood near the river, stripped to the waist, washing his face and neck in the cold water. Serafina tried not to stare, tried not to notice the powerful muscles of his back and shoulders, the way water droplets caught in the dark hair on his chest. The mate bond hummed with approval, with desire, and she felt her cheeks heat with embarrassment at her body's response. "There's tea," Damien called, noticing her. "And bread if you're hungry. Sir Corvus said to let you sleep as long as you needed." "Thank you." Serafina accepted the tin cup of tea gratefully, wrapping her cold fingers around its warmth. The bread was fresh, still soft, and she nibbled it carefully while watching the camp's morning routine. Corvus returned from the river, pulling his shirt back on, and his eyes found hers immediately. "How are you feeling?" "Better," she admitted. "The rest helped." "Good." He poured himself tea and settled onto a nearby log, close enough that she could feel his warmth but not so close as to crowd her. "We'll be reaching Willowmere Village by midday. There's an inn there where you can have a proper bed, a hot bath. Time to recover your strength." Serafina's stomach clenched with anxiety. Willowmere is near the border of Dark Hollow territory. If word reaches my father that I'm there— "Word won't reach him," Corvus said firmly, "and even if it did, you're under my protection now. Your father has no authority over you anymore." "You don't understand pack politics," she said quietly. "As an unmated female, I fall under my father's authority until death or marriage. He could demand my return, and by pack law—" "Pack law changes when a mate bond is involved," Corvus interrupted. "The moment we recognized each other as mates, you fell under my protection, not your father's. He has no legal claim." Serafina wanted to believe him, but 26 years of pack hierarchy and tradition couldn't be dismissed so easily. "Marcus and my father won't see it that way. They'll say the bond hasn't been formalized, hasn't been claimed. They'll say I'm still subject to Dark Hollow authority." Corvus studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Then we'll formalize it, if that's what you want. If you're ready." Her heart hammered against her ribs. He was offering a claiming, a public recognition of their mate bond. It would protect her legally, would make her untouchable by Marcus or her father. But it also meant accepting this stranger as her mate, binding herself to him permanently when she barely knew him. "I'm not ready," she whispered. "I'm sorry. I know that's not fair to you, but I can't. Don't apologize." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. His touch sent sparks racing up her arm, warm and electric. "I told you last night. Take all the time you need. We'll find another way to protect you in the meantime." "What other way?" Serafina asked, trying to ignore how right his hand felt wrapped around hers. "If the bond isn't claimed, if we're not formally mated, then I have no legal standing. My father could send warriors to retrieve me, and you'd have no grounds to refuse." Corvus's smile was slow and dangerous. "Actually, I would, because I'm not just a soldier, Serafina." She frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" Before he could answer, hoofbeats thundered in the distance, growing rapidly closer. The soldiers in the camp immediately went on alert, hands moving to weapons. Corvus stood smoothly, positioning himself between Serafina and the approaching riders, his body tense and ready. 5 wolves burst into the clearing, all in human form, all wearing the silver and black colors of Dark Hollow Pack. Serafina's blood turned to ice as she recognized the man in front. Lucian. Her brother dismounted with casual grace, his handsome face arranged in an expression of concern that didn't reach his cold blue eyes. He was tall and golden-haired like their father, built like a warrior, and he'd always known exactly how attractive he was, how to use his looks to his advantage. "Sister," he said, his voice dripping with false warmth, "thank the goddess we found you. Father has been beside himself with worry." Serafina stood slowly, her hand instinctively covering her belly. "Lucian, what are you doing here?" "Looking for you, of course." He spread his hands in a gesture of innocence, but his eyes tracked to Corvus with sharp calculation. "When word reached us that you'd been seen traveling with unknown soldiers, Father sent me to ensure your safety, to bring you home." "I have no home in Dark Hollow anymore," Serafina said, proud that her voice didn't shake. "Marcus made that clear when he rejected me and cast me out." "Marcus acted hastily," Lucian said smoothly, out of shock and disappointment. "But he's reconsidered. He's willing to take you back, to honor the mating bond despite your condition." "Liar." Serafina could see the calculation in her brother's eyes, could practically hear the wheels turning in his head. Marcus would never take her back, which meant Lucian had another agenda entirely. "How generous of him," she said coldly, "but I'm not interested in returning to a mate who found me worthless." Lucian's expression hardened fractionally. "You don't have a choice, Serafina. As father's daughter, you're under pack authority until you're formally mated. Which you're not, since Marcus rejected the bond." His gaze slid to Corvus again, dismissive. "I'm sure this soldier was kind enough to help you, but your protection is now my responsibility. Come, we have horses." "She's not going anywhere with you," Corvus said quietly. And there was something in his voice that made Serafina's breath catch. Pure authority. Absolute command. Lucian's eyebrows rose. "Excuse me? You have no authority to keep her from her family, unless you're claiming to be her mate?" His tone made it clear how unlikely he found that possibility. "I am her mate," Corvus said calmly. "The moon goddess bonded us, which means your sister is under my protection now, not your father's. And I'm refusing your demand that she return with you." The silence that followed Corvus's declaration stretched taut as a bowstring. Serafina's pulse hammered in her throat, her eyes locked on her brother's face as Lucian's expression shifted from dismissive amusement to something harder, more calculating. His 4 warriors had spread out behind him, hands drifting toward their weapons, wolves clearly visible beneath their skin. "Your mate," Lucian repeated, drawing out the words with deliberate mockery. "How convenient. A bond conveniently discovered just when my sister needs protection from pack law. His gaze swept over Corvus with open contempt. I suppose you expect me to simply accept this claim? To return home and tell our father that his runaway daughter has found herself a mate among common soldiers. What I expect, Corvus said, his voice dropping to something low and dangerous, is irrelevant. What matters is the bond. What matters is that Seraphina is mine now, and I am hers. That's Moon Goddess law, which supersedes your pack politics. Lucian laughed, the sound sharp and cutting. Moon Goddess law requires witnesses to a bond. It requires formal recognition, a claiming. I see no mark on her neck, soldier. I see no completed bond, which means legally, she's still subject to Dark Hollow authority. He took a step forward, and Seraphina felt her wolf rise in response, teeth bared inside her mind. So I'll ask you again, more clearly this time. Step aside and let me take my sister home, or face the consequences of interfering in pack business. The consequences, Corvus said softly, and now there was something in his stance that made even Lucian hesitate. Something that made the other soldiers in the clearing straighten, their hands moving to their swords. You want to discuss consequences, Thornwood? Then let's be very clear about who you're threatening. He stepped forward, and power rolled off him in waves. Not just physical strength, but something deeper. Something ancient and absolute that made Seraphina's wolf whimper and press against her consciousness in recognition. Alpha, not just an alpha. The alpha. I am Corvus Shadowfang, he said, and his voice carried across the clearing like thunder. King of the Northern Territories, ruler of the Shadowfang Pack and 14 others sworn to my banner. And Seraphina is my mate, recognized by the Moon Goddess herself, and witnessed by every man here. His eyes flashed gold, wolf rising to the surface. So when you threaten to take her by force, when you claim authority over her, you're not just defying pack law, you're challenging the king. Seraphina's breath caught in her chest. King. He was the Alpha King. The scarred soldier who'd held her hand through nightmares, who'd defended her against innkeepers and promised her safety. He was Corvus Shadowfang, the most powerful alpha in the known territories, the wolf whose authority even her father would bow to. Lucian's face had gone pale, then flushed with anger. Behind him, his warriors shifted nervously, clearly recognizing the danger they'd walked into. But her brother had always been too proud, too certain of his own cleverness. You expect me to believe that? He demanded. The Alpha King, traveling in disguise, just happening to find my sister in the wilderness? What kind of fool do you take me for? The kind who doesn't know when to back down, Corvus said coldly. Ask your warriors. They can scent my bloodline, can't they? They can feel the weight of my authority. Or do you think 4 soldiers and a fool of a younger son can stand against me and mine? One of Lucian's warriors stepped back, fear clear in his eyes. Another dropped his gaze, neck baring in instinctive submission. But Lucian just clenched his jaw, rage and desperation warring in his expression. Seraphina recognized that look. She'd seen it before, whenever their father favored her accomplishments over his, whenever she'd succeeded where he'd failed. Her brother had always been hungry for recognition, for power, for the inheritance he believed should be his by right of being male. This changes nothing, Lucian said, though his voice had lost its confidence. Even if you are the king, the fact remains that my sister fled Dark Hollow with stolen property. Sacred pack artifacts that belong to our father. She must return to face justice for that theft. I stole nothing, Seraphina said, finding her voice. Her hands trembled against her belly, but she kept her spine straight, her chin raised. I took only what was mine by right, my mother's jewelry, my personal belongings, nothing that belonged to the pack. Father says otherwise, Lucian countered, turning his attention back to her. His expression shifted, became almost gentle, almost concerned. It was the face he'd always shown their father, the dutiful sun mask he wore so well. He says you took the Moonstone pendant, the one passed down through our bloodline for generations, the one meant to go to the pack's next alpha. His eyes gleamed with malicious satisfaction. The one meant for me, sister. And I want it back. The Moonstone pendant. Seraphina's mother had given it to her on her 16th birthday, had pressed it into her hands and told her it was her heritage, her birthright as alpha blood. She'd worn it every day since, hidden beneath her clothes, close to her heart. It had been one of the few things she'd managed to grab before being forced from Dark Hollow territory. That pendant was my mother's, she said, her voice shaking with fury now instead of fear. She gave it to me. Father had no right to promise it to you. Father has every right, Lucian shot back. He's the alpha. What he says is law. And he says that pendant belongs to the next alpha of Dark Hollow, which will be me, once Marcus takes a new mate and produces an heir. Unless you think your little she-wolf bastard has some claim? His lip curled in disgust. Please, Seraphina. Father and I both know what that child really is. A worthless girl just like her mother. Weak. Powerless. The words hit like physical blows, but beneath the pain, something else stirred. Rage, white-hot and burning, surging through her veins like liquid fire. Her wolf snarled inside her mind, and her daughter kicked hard against her ribs, as if responding to the insult. Careful, Corvus said, his voice dropping to a growl. You're speaking about my mate and my daughter. I'd suggest you choose your next words very wisely. But Lucian was beyond wisdom now, beyond caution. He'd always been like this when cornered, lashing out, saying whatever would hurt most. Your daughter? He laughed, bitter and harsh. You claim a rejected wolf's bastard as yours? How noble, how utterly foolish. He took another step forward, his warriors fanning out behind him despite their obvious fear. But nobility doesn't change facts, Your Majesty. That child is Marcus's blood, not yours. A rejected heir, cursed by her own father before she's even born. And my sister is a wolf who couldn't even keep her mate satisfied. What kind of queen would she make? The insult hung in the air like poison. Around the clearing, Corvus's soldiers shifted, hands on weapons, waiting for their king's command. Seraphina felt Corvus's rage through the incomplete bond, felt his wolf straining for release, demanding blood for the disrespect shown to his mate. But beneath that rage, she felt something else. A question. A waiting. He wouldn't move without her permission, she realized. He was holding back, letting her choose how to respond, giving her control instead of taking it. No, she said softly, and Corvus went still. This isn't your fight. Not yet. She stepped forward, around Corvus's protective bulk, and faced her brother directly. Lucian's eyes widened slightly as she approached, surprise flickering across his features. He'd expected her to hide, to cower behind her powerful mate. That's what the old Seraphina would have done. The rejected, broken Seraphina who'd crawled through the wilderness convinced of her own worthlessness. But something had changed. Maybe it was the bond humming in her chest, warm and steady. Maybe it was her daughter's presence, fierce and bright inside her. Maybe it was simply that she'd survived things that should have killed her, and she was done letting men like Marcus and Lucian define her worth. You want the Moonstone pendant? She said, her voice carrying across the clearing with authority she didn't know she possessed. You want Father's legacy, his territory, his recognition as the rightful heir. She took another step forward, and her wolf surged beneath her skin, stronger than she'd felt since the rejection. Then face me for it, wolf to wolf, as tradition demands. Lucian stared at her, shock clear in his expression. What? You heard me. Seraphina's hands began to glow, soft silver light emanating from her palms, that same strange warmth she'd felt during her journey, now manifesting visibly. her daughter's power flowing through her, amplifying her own wolf's strength. I, Seraphina Darkhollow, challenge you for the right to Father's legacy, for the Moonstone Pendant, for Alpha Blood recognition, for everything you've claimed should be yours alone. She smiled, cold and fierce. Unless you're afraid to face a weak, powerless she-wolf? The challenge hung between them, formal and binding. Around the clearing, wolves shifted restlessly, drawn by the scent of dominance, of power being contested. This was old law, ancient law, the kind that superseded pack politics and alpha commands. A blood challenge between alpha-born siblings for inheritance rights. Lucian's face had gone red with rage. You can't be serious. You're pregnant. I'm well aware of my condition, Seraphina interrupted. Which makes your hesitation all the more telling, brother. Afraid you'll lose to a pregnant female? She saw the moment his pride overrode his caution, saw the flash of fury in his eyes, the tensing of his shoulders. He'd never been able to resist a challenge, especially not from her. And she'd just questioned his strength, his dominance, in front of witnesses, in front of the Alpha King himself. Fine, Lucian snarled. If you want to be humiliated one final time before I drag you home, I'll oblige you. He began to strip off his shirt, preparing for the shift. But don't expect mercy, sister. Don't expect me to go easy on you just because you're carrying a bastard. Seraphina felt Corvus's presence at her back, steady and strong. Are you sure about this? He asked quietly, for her ears alone. You don't have to prove anything. I can end this right now. I know, she whispered. But I need to do this. I need to face him myself. She turned her head slightly, meeting his golden eyes. Trust me? Something passed between them, warm and electric through the incomplete bond. Always, Corvus said. Then, louder, to the assembled wolves. Witness this challenge. Seraphina Darkhollow and Lucian Thornwood contest for inheritance rights and alpha blood recognition. The victor claims the Moonstone Pendant and all associated privileges. The defeated forfeits all claim to Darkhollow legacy. His voice rang with authority. By ancient law, this challenge is binding. Do both parties accept these terms? I accept, Seraphina said clearly. I accept, Lucian growled and began to shift. Seraphina let her own wolf rise, feeling the change sweep through her body. Bones cracked and reformed, fur rippling across her skin, senses sharpening to supernatural clarity. Her wolf was smaller than Lucian's, leaner, built for speed rather than brute strength. But as she settled into 4 legs and felt her daughter's power still humming through her consciousness, she realized she'd never felt stronger, never felt more certain. Lucian lunged first, all teeth and fury, clearly intending to end this quickly. But Seraphina was ready. She twisted aside, using his momentum against him, and raked her claws down his flank as he passed. Blood welled, black in the moonlight, and Lucian yelped in surprise and pain. He spun to face her, lips pulled back in a snarl, and she could see the shock in his eyes. He'd expected her to be weak, diminished by rejection and pregnancy. He'd expected an easy victory. He'd been wrong. They circled each other, and Seraphina felt every sense heightened. She could hear Lucian's breathing, fast and angry, could smell his rage and growing uncertainty, could feel through her pause where he'd distribute his weight before he moved. Her daughter's power flowed through her like liquid silver, sharpening her reflexes, strengthening her wolf beyond what should have been possible. Lucian attacked again, trying to use his superior size to overwhelm her, but Seraphina was faster. She ducked beneath his charge and came up under his guard, teeth finding his throat. Not killing, not yet, but holding, showing dominance, showing strength. Lucian froze, every muscle locked, caught between fury and fear. Slowly, deliberately, Seraphina released him and stepped back. A warning, a chance to yield. Lucian scrambled away, blood dripping from his neck, his breathing ragged. For a moment she thought he might submit, thought he might recognize that he was outmatched, that whatever he'd believed about her weakness had been a lie. But pride was a dangerous thing, and Lucian had always had too much of it. He shifted back to human form, naked and bleeding, rage distorting his handsome features into something ugly. "You think you've won?" he spat. "You think this changes anything?" He gestured wildly at his warriors. "Take her, now! We'll bring her back to father in chains if we have to." The warriors hesitated, clearly unwilling to interfere in a formal challenge. But Lucian's authority as Alphaborn, as their mission leader, finally pushed them forward. They began to move toward Seraphina, weapons drawn, prepared to take her by force despite tradition, despite law, and Corvus moved. One moment he was standing at the clearing's edge. The next, he was among Lucian's warriors, moving with speed that shouldn't have been possible. One man went down with a broken arm. Another found himself on his back, Corvus's boot on his chest. The remaining two immediately dropped their weapons and raised their hands in surrender, submission clear in every line of their bodies. The whole thing took perhaps 5 seconds. "The challenge isn't finished," Corvus said calmly, not even breathing hard. "Interfering is a violation of ancient law, the kind of violation that would justify execution." His eyes, burning gold, fixed on Lucian. "Would you like me to execute your warriors, Thornwood? Or will you face your sister with honor?" Lucian's face had gone ashen. He stood alone now, bleeding and exposed, with no allies to hide behind. Seraphina shifted back to human form, power still singing through her veins, silver light still glowing faintly around her hands. She felt magnificent, terrifying, strong in ways she'd never imagined possible. "Yield," she said quietly. "Yield, Lucian, and I'll let you walk away." "Never," he snarled. "You're nothing. A rejected, worthless—" "I am Alpha Blood," Seraphina interrupted, her voice ringing with power. "Daughter of Aldrich Darkhollow, mate to the king himself, and mother to a she-wolf who will be stronger than you could ever imagine." She took a step forward, and Lucian actually flinched back. "I am not weak, brother. I never was. You just needed me to believe I was so you could take what should have been mine by right." The truth of it hung in the air between them. She could see it in his eyes, the flash of guilt, of recognition. Their father had always praised her strategic mind, her connection to the pack, her natural authority, had always said she would have made a fine alpha if she'd been born male, and Lucian had grown up in her shadow, the disappointing son, the one who relied on physical strength because he lacked her political acumen. He'd hated her for it, had celebrated when Marcus rejected her, when she'd been cast out. Because with her gone, finally, he could be the heir he'd always wanted to be. Could claim their father's legacy without her presence exposing his inadequacies. "I, Seraphina Darkhollow, banish you from these lands," she said formally, power thrumming in her words. "By right of Alpha Blood, by right of Challenge One, I cast you out. You are forbidden from Northern Territory. Forbidden from seeking me or mine. Run, brother, and pray our paths never cross again." Lucian stared at her, rage and humiliation warring in his expression. "Father will hear about this. Marcus will—" "Marcus is a coward who rejected his true mate," Corvus said coldly. "And your father has no authority here. Now leave, while you still can. Before I decide that banishment isn't sufficient consequence for threatening my mate." For a long moment Lucian stood frozen. Then, finally, his shoulders slumped. Defeat settled over him like a shroud, and Seraphina felt no triumph, only exhaustion. He shifted back to wolf form, gathered his warriors with a sharp yip, and disappeared into the trees, running, as she'd commanded. Gone. The clearing fell silent except for Seraphina's ragged breathing. The silver light faded from her hands, and suddenly she felt the weight of everything crash down on her. The fear, the rage, the sheer audacity of what she'd just done. She swayed, and immediately Corvus was there, catching her, supporting her weight against his solid warmth. "I've got you," he murmured, and she turned into him, pressing her face against his chest, feeling his heart beating steady and strong beneath her ear. "You were magnificent, so strong, so brave." "I was terrified," she whispered. "I know." His hand stroked down her back, gentle and soothing. "But you did it anyway. You stood up for yourself. For our daughter. You fought for your legacy." He pulled back enough to tip her chin up, meeting her eyes. "I am so proud of you, Seraphina. So grateful the moon goddess gave me you." The words broke something inside her, something tight and painful that had been locked away since Marcus's rejection. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and Corvus wiped them away with his thumbs, his expression infinitely tender. "I'm yours," she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "If you still want me, if the offer still stands, I'm ready. I want the bond. I want you." Corvus's eyes blazed gold, and a low growl rumbled from his chest. "Are you certain? We don't have to do this now. You've been through so much tonight." "I'm certain," Seraphina interrupted. She pressed her hand over his heart, feeling it racing beneath her palm. "You've been patient with me, kind to me. You've protected me and believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. I want to be yours, Corvus, completely, forever." He kissed her then, fierce and claiming, his hands cradling her face like she was something precious. Seraphina melted into him, opening to his tongue, tasting him fully for the first time. Through their incomplete bond, she felt his desire, his love, his absolute devotion. Felt how desperately he wanted her, how much control he'd been exercising to give her space, to let her come to him in her own time. "Mine," he growled against her mouth. "Say it. Tell me you're mine." "Yours," she whispered. "I'm yours, Corvus. Mark me, claim me, make me your mate." His control shattered. He swept her into his arms and carried her to his tent, past soldiers who quickly averted their eyes and gave them privacy. Inside, he laid her down on his bedroll with reverent care, his hands trembling as they traced the curve of her belly, the swell of her breasts. "You're so beautiful," he murmured. "So perfect. I'm going to spend the rest of my life showing you how much I treasure you." He kissed down her throat, his teeth scraping over the junction of her neck and shoulder. Seraphina arched into him, her wolf crying out for the bite, for the bond to complete. But Corvus took his time, worshipping every inch of her skin, learning what made her gasp and moan. His hands were gentle on her pregnant belly, protective and loving, accepting her daughter as fully his own. "Please," Seraphina finally begged, writhing beneath him. "Please, Corvus. I need. "I know what you need," he rumbled. He positioned himself over her, his eyes meeting hers. "This will hurt for a moment, but then it will feel right. Perfect. Like we were always meant to be one. Do it," she said. "I trust you." He struck swift and sure, his teeth sinking into the junction of her neck and shoulder. Pain exploded through her, sharp and burning, and then transformed into something else. Pleasure. Pure, liquid gold pleasure that spread through her veins like wildfire. She felt his wolf merge with hers, felt the bond snap into place with an almost audible click. Through the bond, she felt everything he felt. His overwhelming love for her, his fierce protectiveness toward their daughter, his absolute certainty that she was his mate, his queen, his everything. The depth of his emotion made her sob with joy, with relief, with the sheer rightness of it. But the bond wasn't complete, not yet, not until she marked him in return. "My turn," she gasped, and felt his surprise through the connection. You're mine too, Corvus. Mine to claim, mine to keep. She pulled him down and sank her own teeth into his throat, tasting copper and magic and power. Corvus made a sound somewhere between a groan and a growl, his body shuddering over hers. Through the bond, she felt his shock, his pleasure, his absolute surrender to her claim. Yours, he rasped. I'm yours, my fierce little wolf. Always yours. The bond completed with a flash of silver gold light, settling into place like coming home. Seraphina felt it humming between them, warm and unbreakable, connecting her to him in ways she couldn't fully comprehend. She could feel him in her mind, in her heart, in her very soul. And he could feel her the same way. They lay tangled together afterward, his hand resting on her belly, feeling their daughter kick against his palm. Hello, little one, he murmured. I'm your father now. I'm going to love you so much. Protect you and your mother with everything I am. Through the bond, Seraphina felt the truth of his words, felt his absolute devotion to them both. She's lucky to have you, she whispered. We both are. I'm the lucky one, Corvus countered. He kissed her forehead, her nose, her lips. You're my queen, Seraphina, my mate, my partner, my everything. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving that you were never worthless, that you were always magnificent. 3 weeks later, they rode into the heart of Northern Territory, where Corvus's pack waited to meet their new Luna Queen. Seraphina had expected resistance, had feared that other wolves would see her as Marcus had, as a failure, a reject, carrying another man's unwanted child. Instead, they bowed. Every wolf in the assembled crowd went to one knee as she passed, heads lowered in respect, throats bared in submission. At the front of the crowd stood an ancient white-furred wolf, Corvus's mother, who smiled with genuine warmth and embraced Seraphina like a long-lost daughter. Welcome home, she said. Welcome to Shadowfang. The ceremony recognizing Seraphina as Luna Queen was held under the full moon, with representatives from all 14 packs sworn to Corvus's banner in attendance. When Corvus placed the queen's circlet on her head, not hiding the mark on her throat, but displaying it proudly, the assembled wolves howled their approval. Later, much later, Seraphina's banishment of Lucian was formally recorded in the pack archives, witnessed and sealed by the Alpha King himself. Marcus's pack, leaderless after their alpha fled in disgrace rather than face Corvus's justice, was absorbed into Shadowfang territory. Seraphina's father sent a letter, cold and formal, acknowledging her new status, but making no apology for how he'd sat silent while she was cast out. She burned it without responding and felt only relief. She had a new family now, a better one. 4 weeks later, on the winter solstice, Seraphina went into labor. Corvus stayed beside her the entire time, holding her hand, supporting her weight, murmuring encouragement through the bond. When their daughter finally arrived, small and perfect and screaming with impressive volume, he wept openly. She's beautiful, he said, cradling the silver-eyed infant with infinite gentleness. She's absolutely perfect. He carried their daughter before the assembled pack the next morning, declaring her his heir with a voice that carried across the valley. This is Princess Lyra Shadowfang, he announced, my daughter, my heir, the she-wolf who will unite the packs as no son ever could. Any who question her legitimacy, any who doubt her worth, will answer to me. No one questioned, no one doubted. Seraphina watched from her seat of honor, recovered enough to attend the ceremony, and felt the settled warmth of the bond humming between her and Corvus. Felt their daughter's bright, fierce presence in her mind, because Lyra was Alpha-born too, connected to her parents through blood and magic. They were a family, complete and unbreakable. That night, alone in their chambers, Corvus laid Lyra in her cradle and drew Seraphina into his arms. "Are you happy?" he asked quietly. She thought about everything she'd survived. The rejection, the exile, the desperate journey through wilderness, the fear and pain and exhaustion. And then she thought about what she'd gained: a mate who cherished her, a daughter who would grow up knowing her worth, a pack who respected her, a future full of possibility. "I'm home," she said simply. Finally, truly home. Corvus kissed her forehead, his hand finding hers, fingers intertwining. Through the bond, she felt his love, his devotion, his absolute certainty that they would face whatever came next together. The moon goddess had not been cruel after all. She had simply been clearing away what was false to make room for what was true. And here, in Corvus's arms, with their daughter sleeping peacefully nearby, Seraphina finally understood what it meant to be chosen. Not by a mate who valued her only for what she could give him, but by a mate who valued her for who she was, who saw her strength, her courage, her worth, who loved her completely and forever. She was Seraphina Shadowfang now, Luna Queen, mate to the Alpha King, mother to a daughter who would change the world. And she had never been more certain of who she was or where she belonged. Home, family, love, at last.